Hey guys, I'm Abby Sharp and welcome to Abby's Kitchen and the beginning of our new series called The Fertility Files. Today I'm finally doing a video on a highly requested topic, PCOS. I have been totally blown away with the number of questions I get about PCOS here on the channel, which I think just goes to prove how misunderstood and complicated this condition really is. I myself was actually diagnosed with PCOS a few years ago when I was trying to conceive my son, and that's the reason why we had to use IVF. But alas, more on that later. Today we're going to share the most current research on PCOS management, and we'll also be joined by weight-inclusive intuitive eating dietitian Julie Duffy-Dillon, who specializes in PCOS. We're going to be talking about whether or not weight loss is necessary when it comes to PCOS, as well as some evidence-based recommendations for what to eat and what to do when managing PCOS. As a general disclosure, remember that the information you're about to see is for education and entertainment purposes only, and you should always seek advice from your healthcare team for your unique case. Okay, let's get into it. First, let's define PCOS. So PCOS, aka Polycystic Ovary Syndrome, involves an imbalance in women's sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, leading to the growth of ovarian cysts, aka benign masses. If left untreated, PCOS can lead to irregular or absent periods, infertility, unwanted hair growth on our face and body, acne, alopecia, pregnancy complications, and even cancer. PCOS can be diagnosed when at least 2 out of the 3 of the following occurs. Number 1, the ovaries are polycystic because either there are 12 or more follicles on one ovary, or the size of one or both ovaries is very high. Number 2, hyperandrogenism, where there's a high level of androgens, which are the male hormones like testosterone, or there are symptoms of excess androgens like acne or excessive hair growth. And 3, there are issues with your period like a lack of period, irregular periods, or lack of ovulation. For me personally, I was diagnosed because I wasn't ovulating at all, and my ovaries were slightly polycystic. But of course, everyone is different, so of course PCOS can look and operate completely differently depending on the individual and requires a professional to diagnose. Now, let's talk about some of the traditional management strategies for PCOS, starting with your diet. So one of the dietary recommendations that evidence suggests may hold some merit in managing symptoms is a low glycemic index diet. So a low glycemic index diet, or a low GI diet, consists of carbohydrate-based foods that are slow digesting and cause a gradual rise in blood sugar and insulin, plus of course a lot of healthy proteins and healthy fats. So some examples of low GI carbs include things like whole grain breads, steel-cut oats, bulgur, sweet potatoes, milk, chickpeas, and lentils. So one study found that when women with PCOS followed a low GI diet, their menstrual regularity improved when compared with individuals who were following a standard healthy diet. This likely had something to do with the fact that fewer blood sugar spikes and falls improves insulin sensitivity, which in turn may help improve menstrual irregularity. A more recent 2019 study found that a low GI diet improved menstrual irregularity in 80% of women with PCOS. However, in that particular study, the low GI diet was also energy restricted, so it isn't clear whether or not the change reported was because of the energy restriction, the low GI diet, any associated weight loss, or some combination. The researchers, however, did suggest that a low GI diet may delay the absorption of carbohydrates, improving metabolic pathways and reducing insulin resistance. Now, does the evidence suggest that low GI needs to be low carb? Not necessarily, as these things are not the same thing. However, I did find a systematic review examining a variety of diets in the treatment of PCOS, and it was found that a low carb diet was associated with a greater reduction in insulin resistance compared to a conventional diet. Having said that, as with a lot of research on dieting, we don't know the long-term likelihood of dietary adherence and long-term improvements in health. Choosing higher fiber, lower glycemic index carbohydrates rather than cutting out carbs altogether is typically a much more sustainable approach for most women. Also, it doesn't mean you can't have higher GI carbs. You really just want to focus on pairing those carbs with lean protein and healthy fats to help stabilize the blood sugars further. Now finally, even though it's tempting given the diet culture that we live in, you actually want to make sure that you're eating enough and eating regularly. I'm going to chat more about this with Julie when I patch her in, but in short, when we let ourselves get too hungry, our blood sugars plummet, we get ravenous, and then we see massive spikes when we do finally eat. Restricting also sends us into that binge restrict cycle, which ultimately can perpetuate metabolic dysfunction. Next, let's talk about supplements and herbs. There are a ton of supplements and herbs that claim to eradicate PCOS symptoms, but we really only have solid evidence to support a few. First is inositol. So inositol is really number one here. It's a small molecule that is structurally similar to glucose and is naturally found in foods like whole grains and citrus fruits. One 2016 systematic review found that supplementation with inositol improved hormonal and reproductive disturbances in women with PCOS. Another 2017 meta-analysis found that inositol improved the metabolic profile of women with PCOS and reduced some of the high levels of androgen hormones that cause a lot of the symptoms and problems. Finally, the evidence also suggests that it may improve pregnancy outcomes for women with PCOS undergoing IVF. Next is omega-3s. Let's be real. I think most of us could probably benefit from an omega-3 supplement, especially if we don't eat a lot of fatty fish. But one 2018 systematic review and meta-analysis found that omega-3 supplementation in PCOS patients helped improve insulin resistance and reduce total cholesterol, triglycerides, and LDL levels. That's pretty great. Next is vitamin D. So vitamin D deficiency is actually very common in women with PCOS, possibly because of the metabolic and endocrine disorders that are associated with the disease. So it's often recommended to patients with PCOS to supplement with vitamin D, although admittedly, the research on this one is still a little bit unclear. One 2015 systematic review and meta-analysis found a positive association between PCOS and vitamin D deficiency. However, the studies did not find that vitamin D supplementation had a beneficial effect. That being said, the researchers of the study did recommend larger prospective studies to further assess the association between vitamin D levels and PCOS treatment. And in my professional opinion, most people, at least here where I live in Canada, can usually benefit from a vitamin D supplement. And that brings me to probiotics. While we're still not 100% sure about the vitamin D alone, research has found that the combination of vitamin D and a probiotic supplement may be effective at treating symptoms. One 2019 randomized control trial found that vitamin D and probiotic co-supplementation improved depression, anxiety, and stress scale scores in women with PCOS. It was also associated with a reduction in total testosterone, hair growth, CRP, which is an inflammation marker, and the oxidative stress marker, MDA, when compared with the placebo. And then finally, I want to quickly touch on some herbs that are commonly used, including maca root, ashwagandha, holy basil, licorice, chasteberry, and Tribulus terrestris. It's a big word, I don't know. So I feel like I've just said a Harry Potter spell, I'm going to be totally honest, but there are lots of herbs that are often recommended for treating PCOS symptoms. However, the research on their effectiveness is pretty limited. Many of these herbs carry some antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, which is probably why they're commonly recommended for treating PCOS. So research has shown that C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation, is typically higher in PCOS patients, and that when CRP is reduced, so are the metabolic symptoms of PCOS. So while it's totally possible that one or a combination of herbs may serve as a good adjunct to traditional supplements and medication, they really should not be relied on their own to treat your PCOS. So we'll discuss diet in a little bit more detail later on in this video when I patch in Julie, but I also want to explore some other evidence-based lifestyle changes for PCOS management. Next is getting enough sleep and reducing stress. So you guys know I need to take my own advice here and chill out, but sleep and stress management is so key. Research has revealed that, aligned with my own experience, sleep disorders and insomnia are significantly more common in women with PCOS. And getting a sleep when you're struggling with already messed up hormones can totally worsen your PCOS symptoms. Okay, number 2 is quitting smoking. I'm good on this front because I've never smoked a day in my life, but smoking has been found to worsen PCOS symptoms and even put someone at higher risk for metabolic syndrome. So it's definitely recommended to avoid or quit smoking if you're already a smoker. Number 3 is acupuncture. Now, there is some evidence that acupuncture may influence ovulation by affecting levels of various hormones. However, its mechanism is still not very well understood. So according to the Cochrane database, there is currently insufficient evidence to support the use of acupuncture for the treatment of ovulation disorders in women with PCOS. But, if nothing else, a lot of women, myself included, find it really stress relieving, and therefore it may be a nice complement to your traditional healthcare regime. Personally, I am a huge fan of acupuncture, and I think it's made a really big difference in my fertility journey, even if it is just the placebo effect. And number 4, avoiding endocrine disruptors. So over the years, it has been suggested that endocrine disruptor chemicals like BPA may contribute to the rise in PCOS. Some animal studies have found that BPA exposure tended to disrupt ovarian and reproductive functions in females, while a 2017 systematic review and meta-analysis found that PCOS patients had significantly higher BPA levels compared with a control group. Researchers from the study believe that BPA might be involved in the insulin resistance and hyperandrogenism of PCOS. However, more quality studies are definitely needed to explore this association. Now, the last lifestyle change that has always been recommended for the treatment of PCOS is weight loss. I've waited to mention this one because while it's probably the first thing a doctor will just tell you to do, it's definitely controversial. So first of all, why is weight loss so universally recommended? I don't know. I mean, maybe doctors think that weight loss is easy. I guess it's easy to send somebody off with that suggestion and hope that they come back in a changed body. But I will say the general recommendation is based on research suggesting that obesity and abdominal fat can exacerbate PCOS symptoms by increasing insulin resistance. Now, while the mechanism is still not perfectly understood, some research suggests that visceral belly fat, which is the fat around our organs to protect them, may release free fatty acids and inflammatory hormones that may drive insulin resistance. It is important to note, however, that not all women with PCOS struggle with insulin resistance, and some of us are actually quite thin. I'm a good example of that right here. Furthermore, a lot of PCOS experts like Julie Duffy-Dillon says that doling out universal weight loss advice to women with PCOS could actually have some serious dangerous effects. For one, disordered eating is significantly more prevalent in women with PCOS, with 86% of patients with PCOS presenting with a subclinical eating disorder. While it's unclear why this is, it may be related to the shame that women carry and the pressure that's being placed on this population to lose weight at literally any expense. Also, a 2017 study found that repeated attempts at weight loss, which resulted in weight cycling, predicted binge eating in a sample of women with PCOS, even if those women were considered lean. And I think that this whole binge eating thing is something that a lot of women who have the condition can probably relate to. I also know that research has found that low-calorie dieting increases cortisol, which is linked to insulin resistance and weight gain over time, which may be another reason why weight loss may not always be the lowest risk option for every woman with PCOS. I also want to mention the fact that long-term caloric restriction has been linked with inflammation, and people with PCOS already live in a chronic pro-inflammatory state. Now, to discuss ditching the diet and managing PCOS, I've invited registered dietitian Julie Duffy-Dillon, who is an intuitive eating and PCOS specialist. Welcome, Julie.
Hey, Abby, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. So first of all, I would love if you could tell me a little bit why you believe that the blanket statement to just kind of go lose weight may be bad advice for a lot of women who are living with PCOS.
I think it's very bad advice for a number of reasons. First of all, PCOS is passed down through families, so we know it has a genetic connection. And weight didn't cause PCOS, so why would it fix it? That's a really big, important thing to keep in mind. And we also know that diets don't work for most people. It's going to work for some people, but very few. So if it doesn't work for most people, why would it work for people with PCOS? And then the other part of it goes even deeper. And research that has been recently published has been exploring the relationship with binge eating and PCOS. And what they have found is that many people with PCOS experience binge eating because yo-yo dieting, or what we also call weight cycling, predicts binge eating. And there's a lot of complications with PCOS that people who have it will understand this. There's so many different hormonal issues going on. One in particular is high circulating insulin, plus those higher androgens like testosterone and lower fancy hormone called CCK, or cholecystokinin. Those are really common in PCOS, and those lead to really intense cravings. But then when you also eliminate foods, especially carbs and sugar, that will intensify those cravings. And I don't have PCOS, so I don't know what these cravings are like. But I know when I have a craving, it's kind of like, I want something sweet. Okay, so PCOS cravings are different. They're primal. Every cell in the body is screaming, eat. And it's like someone who's been drowning is finally to the surface and breathing, gasping for air. PCOS cravings are the same. And so when we tell people, just lose weight, it's basically telling people, like, don't be so obsessed with air,
Right, right.
That's dumb, right? Because
yeah.
we need air to breathe and we need food to live. And so people with PCOS, it's really important to know that you don't have to diet. And really, I would say you shouldn't diet in order to manage PCOS.
So in your experience, like, what are some of the ways that intentional weight loss diets can actually like potentially worsen symptoms?
So again, for some people, diets may work for them, but for most people with PCOS, what ends up happening is because diets don't work for most people, people go on diets over and over again to try to manage their weight because everyone's telling them to do that. And what weight cycling or that yo-yo dieting is connected to is higher insulin levels, higher testosterone, higher cortisol, higher cholesterol, and higher blood sugar. All things that is also connected to PCOS.
Right.
And so it's like a double whammy, basically. And then also people with PCOS, what researchers have found rather, is that people with PCOS have a chronic pro-inflammatory state. It's a really kind of common experience that leads to lots of fatigue and brain fog. And we've also connected that same pro-inflammatory state to weight cycling. And so again, it's like it's worsening the symptoms with it. I also think it's important to shift it even to like, what's the experience? If like, we're like, everyone just needs to lose weight to treat PCOS. What my clients have taught me is that keeps them from going to the doctor. So if you don't go to the doctor as often to get attention for your healthcare needs, well, it's obvious that's going to affect your health too, in a really negative way. Even deeper than that, having this blanket statement basically teaches us that fat bodies or larger bodies or bodies that people will call obese or overweight, those bodies are bad. And what we know that that does is it's a form of discrimination. It's weight stigma, and weight stigma is also connected to higher insulin levels, higher testosterone, or not testosterone, but higher cortisol and cholesterol and blood sugar. So, the very things that weight is supposed to be treating with PCOS, it's just going to make it worse.
Thank you, Julie. That was so amazing. What a great way to explain it. Now, a lot of women with PCOS often describe feeling overwhelming cravings, particularly for carbs, as we know. And this phenomenon occurs because cells that have become insulin resistant no longer are responding to insulin. So the pancreas keeps producing more insulin to compensate. And since the muscles aren't properly getting the glucose that it wants, it's basically just kind of floating around the bloodstream, and the muscles are effectively starving and sending out more and more signals for their preferred source of fuel, which of course is sugar. So it's that combination of high circulating insulin and androgen hormones that tend to cause these primal cravings that a lot of women describe having. So how do you suggest that women can respond to their cravings in an intuitive way without kind of worsening their PCOS symptoms by gaining more weight or spiking their insulin or all of those kinds of things?
So I am so glad you asked me that question, Abby. This is a really important thing to keep in mind with PCOS because people with PCOS are taught to ignore their cravings or trick them, or they should never listen to them. But carb cravings are insight. I think carb cravings are the guideposts to help people understand what they need to treat their PCOS. When people have carb cravings, they should be listened to, respected, and not shunned. They're the way that the person knows that their condition needs more attention. What I teach my clients that I talk to with PCOS is that when they have a carb craving, if they can, it's really, really important to experiment with stepping back and noticing what was just going on. Have you been eating enough? Have you been sleeping enough? Are you eating enough protein? Are you restricting too much? Are you exercising too much? What is going on? Maybe you need to change your medications. Have you forgotten your supplements? It's a really wonderful way to know that insulin is really high and what can we do to help manage it? It may be a temporary thing, or, PCOS is this chronic condition that we cannot cure. No matter what people say, you cannot cure PCOS. And since it's chronic, it's going to change and get worse. Right. And so there are times where carb cravings will come out of nowhere with people that I work with, and I teach them to just lean into them if they can. And by doing this, it'll help them to navigate what they're doing.
I think that's amazing advice, and probably advice that most of my viewers with PCOS have never heard before. So it's definitely against the grain, and I think very much needed. So thank you for that. That's a big question I'm getting a lot. So Julie, if we really should not be recommending that women just diet to lose weight, what kind of things do you recommend in terms of dietary recommendations and interventions when it comes to planning and meals and snacks and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so I know many people with PCOS are told they have to diet to help manage their PCOS. So when they think about not dieting, they're like, what do I do then? I don't even know how to eat without dieting. And there are so many things you can do that helps promote health with PCOS and food. And first and foremost, I know this is going to be surprising, but make sure you're eating enough. I think people think they need so little food, especially carbs and sugar. And I think it's really important to make sure you're eating enough because, again, that chronic pro-inflammatory state, those muscles that you talked about that we're starving, these are really important things that our body needs to survive and to help those cravings not be so primal.
Right.
And so after people are making sure they're eating enough, I also tell people that they probably need more protein when they experience PCOS. So I encourage them to strategically experiment with protein, especially first thing in the morning and before bed, and to see how that helps their energy levels and cravings. And then another part with nutrition is supplements. There's a number of supplements that people experiment with PCOS. There is one in particular that has a lot of research behind it. It's called Inositol. I encourage everybody with PCOS to talk to their healthcare provider about using it. It's one that can really help with that insulin resistance that we talked about before. It gets to the cellular level and what may be a defect or a deficiency that's going on with PCOS. And actually, it's one of the things that may replace metformin eventually. So keep your eye on like the research with it. It's really exciting. But besides that, the other part of it that I think is really good is to make sure that you're moving your body in a way that feels good. I think people with PCOS think they have to torture their body with exercise and do it even when they don't feel like it. But a really good way to know if you're kind of onto something, like onto the tools that are helping you, is when you start to crave movement. When you're like, I kind of want to move my body today. That's when you really can start thinking about how can exercise fit into the picture. And it may take time to get to that, making sure you're eating enough for a couple months before you really can feel that craving to move again. And it will happen. And then lastly, I know people with PCOS tell me, Julie, it's a really hard sell to love my body. I'm not getting respect because of my body. I'm not getting really access to reproductive medicine, or I'm not getting things that I need to take care of myself because of the way my body looks. People with PCOS are taught that their body is wrong, that they need to be smaller, and people in larger bodies are mistreated and denied access to things like reproductive medicine. And so it can be really hard to love your body. But if you can, with PCOS, find a way to respect your body, which may mean turning away from diets, treating it with care and compassion, those are things that we know in research that helps lower cortisol, helps to lower inflammation, helps to lower triglycerides, things that we associate with PCOS. And it's not an individual thing. You can't fix it on your own, but doing those things leaning towards body respect is something that also is something you can do without dieting that can really help your health.
I love that advice. And, also just thinking about from my own experience struggling with infertility, like so often you feel like your body is failing you and you're so mad at it and you're angry and you're just so disappointed. So I think that there is so much to be said for having that compassion for yourself and for your body and what it is doing well and what it can, provide you with. And I think that's really great universal advice. So that's fantastic. Thanks for that, Julie. So, of course, I want to give a big thank you to you, Julie, for joining us today. I'm sure everyone has learned so much from this conversation. And I would love for you to get some more information about Julie. I've got some contact information for her below, so you can get her website and her social media and follow her and all of that stuff. So thank you again, Julie, for all of your help today.
Thank you, Abby. It was so great chatting.
Bye.
Bye.
That was awesome. So thank you guys all for watching this. If you liked this video, please be sure to give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment with any PCOS questions that you might have. Julie has graciously offered to pop by and help answer a few if it's out of the scope for me. But of course, always subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye.